Get out. We need our space. Her words hit me like a blade, sharp and cold. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, wasn't just kicking me out of a house. She was kicking me out of my own family. And Daniel, my only son, just stood there. No defense, no protest, just silence. That was the moment I realized. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you raised, the people you love most. At 76, I thought I was too old for heartbreak. I was wrong. This was only the beginning of a battle for respect, survival, and justice. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the very people you trusted most, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been forced to fight for your own place in your family? Get out. We need our space. Those were the words that broke me. They didn't come from a stranger or an enemy. They came from Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, standing in the living room of the house that still belonged to me. My name is Martha Callahan, and I am 76 years old. I was a high school English teacher for more than 30 years before I retired. I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at a person. Losing my husband James to a heart attack, learning to live alone after decades of companionship, even saying goodbye to friends who passed before me. But nothing prepared me for the day my own son stood by and let his wife push me out. I had come by that afternoon with nothing more than a plate of cookies. It was a habit I had carried all my life, feeding my family, showing love through the kitchen. The Magnolia House, our old antebellum home in Savannah, still stood as proud as it had when James and I first bought it. The tall white columns, the creaky wooden floors, the smell of old oak trees in the summer breeze. It was our dream, and after James passed, it became my responsibility. I paid the taxes. I handled the repairs. It was my name on the deed, and yet, there I was, standing in the entryway like an intruder. Tiffany stood in front of me, her manicured hands on her hips, her chin lifted high. She didn't just say the words, she hurled them at me like stones. Get out, we need our space. I turned immediately to Daniel, my only child, my son. He was 50 years old now, graying at the temples. The same boyish eyes he'd had since he was little. I waited for him to step in, to defend me, to tell his wife that she was out of line. But he didn't. He wouldn't even look at me. His gaze dropped to the floorboards, as if the patterns in the wood could offer him courage. The silence between us was louder than Tiffany's shouting. And in that silence, I slipped back into a memory, one I hadn't thought about in years. Daniel was 10, running down these same stairs 2 at a time. He'd tripped near the bottom and skinned his knee. Tears welled in his eyes, but he tried to be brave. I remember kneeling in front of him, pressing a bandage over the scrape. That's when he grabbed my hand and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll always protect you. I promise." That promise used to be my anchor. I leaned on it in the hardest moments after James died. I believed it like scripture, but standing in that hallway now, with Tiffany glaring and Daniel silent, that promise dissolved like sugar in water. "Did you hear me?" Tiffany snapped again. "This isn't your house anymore. We deserve privacy. We deserve space without you barging in all the time." I wanted to remind her, loudly, that it was still my house, that I paid for it, that without me, she and Daniel would be struggling to make rent somewhere far less grand. But the words caught in my throat. My heart hurt too much to fight. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, maybe Tiffany's right. Maybe you should give us a little more room. Just call before you come over next time." That cut deeper than Tiffany's cruelty. My own son telling me to treat my family home like I was an outsider needing permission. I looked around the room, noticing the small changes Tiffany had already made. A modern rug that clashed with the old hardwood. A glass coffee table that replaced James's heavy oak one. Bit by bit, she was erasing the history of our family, as if it were nothing more than clutter. I felt my legs tremble, but pride kept me standing tall. I set the plate of cookies down on the console table and forced a smile. "I only came to drop these off," I said, my voice shaking. Tiffany didn't thank me. She didn't even glance at the cookies. She just folded her arms tighter and turned her back, as if that ended the conversation. Daniel finally looked up, but only for a moment. His eyes met mine, full of shame, but still he said nothing to defend me. So I turned, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the heavy Georgia air. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of me. As I reached my car, I looked back at the Magnolia House, those tall white columns, the porch James and I had painted together, the windows where I once watched Daniel run in the yard with his dog. And I whispered to myself, at 76 years old, I never thought I'd be thrown out of a home that still carries my name. That was the moment I knew. Something inside me had cracked. And once a crack appears, it doesn't take long for the whole foundation to shatter. When I was younger, I never pictured my life turning out this way. My name is Martha Callahan, and I have lived in Savannah, Georgia for more than 5 decades. I taught English literature at the local high school for 30 years. I spent my days with Shakespeare and Steinbeck, trying to get teenagers to care about words and stories the way I did. Some of them did, most of them didn't, but I loved my job. I loved my routine. And at the end of every school day, I came home to James. James Callahan was my husband for nearly 40 years. He was a practical man, steady, quiet, the kind of husband who didn't always say much but showed his love in everything he did. If a faucet leaked, James fixed it. If my car made a noise, James was under the hood before I even asked. He didn't buy roses or jewelry, but he built bookshelves for me when he saw how my novels were spilling across the floor. That was the kind of love we had. Together, we saved enough to buy the Magnolia House, a 2-story antebellum home right in the heart of Savannah. It wasn't perfect when we bought it. The roof leaked, the paint was peeling, and the floors creaked in protest with every step. But James saw what it could be. He spent weekends sanding down the stair railing until it gleamed, replacing broken windows and painting the porch white until it looked like something out of a postcard. I can still picture him in his overalls, sweat dripping down his face as he worked on those tall windows, pausing only when Daniel, our son, ran up to tug at his pant leg. Daniel would run circles around the yard, chasing the dog, his laughter echoing through the live oak trees. Those were the best days. My heart still aches thinking about them. We filled that house with more than just furniture. Every corner carried a memory. The oak dining table James built himself, where we hosted Thanksgivings with neighbors who had no family nearby. The antique grandfather clock James inherited from his father, its chimes filling the hallway every hour. My collection of porcelain figurines, one bought every summer when we took a short trip to Tybee Island. None of these things had much financial value, but to me they were pieces of our life, tangible reminders that love had lived here. Then James died. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. I woke up one morning beside him and went to bed that night in a house that felt unbearably empty. Daniel was already grown, busy with his career and his own family, but he came back home to help me through those first weeks. For a while, it was just me, the ticking clock, and the memories pressing down like heavy shadows. I adjusted. That's what widows do. We adjust. I kept teaching until retirement. I joined the church choir. I invited neighbors for Sunday dinner. I told myself I was doing fine. Then Daniel's marriage collapsed. He called me late one night, his voice broken. He and his wife were divorcing, and he sounded like that same 10-year-old boy again, lost and uncertain. I told him to come home. Not to my house, but to the Magnolia House, because by then it was sitting empty. I had moved to a smaller cottage on the river after James's death, unable to sleep in the bed we once shared. The Magnolia House became more of an investment property, a piece of history I wasn't ready to sell. When I handed Daniel the keys, I thought I was giving him a chance to rebuild his life. I wanted him to have stability, to have roots while he healed. And when he introduced me to Tiffany, I wanted to believe the best. Tiffany was polished. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect nails. She had a way of speaking that always made me feel like I was being judged, even when she was complimenting me. But Daniel seemed happy for the first time in years, so I swallowed my doubts. After all, what mother doesn't want to see her child smile again? The engagement came quickly. Too quickly, in my opinion. 6 months after the divorce papers were signed, Tiffany was parading around the Magnolia House like it already belonged to her. I remember one particular evening, I had hosted a small dinner for them in the dining room. I made roast chicken and mashed potatoes, Daniel's childhood favorite. Tiffany barely touched her plate. Instead, she kept eyeing the chandelier James had installed himself decades ago. "This must be worth a fortune," she said, squinting up at the crystals. "It's not about the value," I told her quietly. "It's about the memories." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. Over the months that followed, I began noticing more and more of her comments. She didn't like the grandfather clock. It was too old-fashioned. She thought the dining table took up too much space. She hinted that maybe the porcelain figurines I had collected my entire life looked a little childish. Every remark was like a tiny knife cutting away at the life James and I had built. Daniel didn't defend me, not once. He just sat there, staring at his plate, pretending not to notice. What Tiffany didn't understand was that the Magnolia House wasn't just wood and plaster. It was the story of my marriage, my family, my life. Every scratch on the floor told a story. Every creak in the staircase was James's handiwork. Every antique, every keepsake carried love inside it. But in Tiffany's hands, all of it was nothing. Just clutter. Just things in the way. She wanted space, she said. Space to make the house hers. And that's when I realized every memory I had cherished, every piece of my past I had held on to, in her eyes, was nothing more than trash. Every memory I tried to preserve, in my daughter-in-law's hands, became nothing more than an eyesore to be thrown away. Dinner that evening was supposed to be a small family get-together. I had cooked pot roast, Daniel's favorite since he was a boy, and set the table with the same blue china I used every Sunday for years. I wanted it to feel like home again, like the old days when laughter filled this house instead of tension. But from the moment Tiffany walked in, I knew it was going to be another performance. She looked around the dining room like a guest inspecting a hotel. Her perfume filled the air before she even spoke. "Wow," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "This place feels smaller every time I visit." I smiled politely, trying to keep peace. "That's because I filled it with too many memories," I said, half joking. Her lips curved into a smirk. "Or maybe it's just time to make some new ones." Daniel pulled out her chair like a good husband and pretended not to hear the sting in her words. We sat down. I served the food. She pushed the carrots to the edge of her plate. "Daniel tells me you've been tired lately," she said suddenly, her voice sweet and sharp all at once. "You ever think about moving into one of those nice retirement communities on the river? They have staff, security, social activities." Her eyes lifted to mine, bright and cold. "It might be safer for someone your age." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I looked at my son. He stared down at his plate, pretending to cut his meat. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled, but I forced it to stay even. "I managed just fine on my own." Tiffany shrugged. "Of course. I just thought you'd be happier around people your own age instead of rattling around in that big house alone." That last word, alone, landed like a slap. She wanted me gone. Not from dinner, from their lives. The rest of the meal was silent except for the sound of silverware tapping against china. When it was over, I offered dessert, lemon pie, the same recipe James loved, but Tiffany said they had another engagement. Daniel followed her lead, helping her into her coat while I stood there holding the untouched pie. They left with polite smiles. I washed the dishes in silence, my hands shaking in the warm water. That night, I opened my old leather journal. I'd kept one since my teaching days. My handwriting has grown slower with age, but I still write when my heart feels heavy. I wrote only short sentences that night, just fragments, really. "Dinner today." Tiffany's voice, cold as the silver on the table. Daniel said nothing. I used to feel proud watching him sit at that table. Now I just feel invisible. The next morning, I reread the words and close the book. I told myself to stop being so sensitive, to remember that families change. But deep down, I knew what was happening. Love doesn't disappear in one blow. It fades quietly, little by little, until the silence becomes unbearable. 2 months. Later came my 77th birthday. I woke up early, made coffee, and waited. Usually Daniel was the first one to call. Even after he married Tiffany, he never forgot. He'd call and say, "Oh, no, morning, Mom. Ready for your birthday breakfast?" And I'd laugh and tell him I was too old for candles. But that morning, the phone stayed quiet. By noon, a few old friends from church had called and my neighbor Edna had dropped off a card. But not Daniel, not even a text. I told myself maybe he was planning something special, maybe a surprise dinner later. So I baked myself a small cake anyway, a habit I couldn't break. Lemon with buttercream, James's favorite. I put on a nice blue dress and set 2 plates just in case they came by. At 6 o'clock, I drove to Magnolia House. The street was lined with cars, lights glowing from every window. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe it was a surprise. Maybe Tiffany had actually organized a family dinner. But when I got to the door, I heard laughter. Loud, careless, unfamiliar. Through the window, I saw people dressed in formal clothes, glasses of champagne in hand. It wasn't a birthday dinner. It was a party, a big one. I rang the bell. The laughter stopped. When Daniel opened the door, the color drained from his face. "Mom," he said quietly, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. Behind him, Tiffany appeared, holding a champagne flute. Oh, she said, smiling too wide. Martha, what a surprise. We didn't know you were coming by. I looked past them, saw a decorated table, a banner that read, Congratulations, Daniel. My heart sank. So, it's not my birthday you're celebrating, I said softly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I'm sorry, Mom. It's just a work thing. We meant to call you tomorrow. Tiffany's tone stayed bright. You understand, right? These events are professional. It's not really your crowd. I stood there holding my cake, the frosting melting slightly under my fingers. People behind them whispered. One woman gave me a pitying look before turning away. I forced a smile. Of course, I said. Congratulations, Daniel. I handed him the cake. Something sweet for your party. Then I turned around and walked back to my car before the tears could come. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, an old woman alone on her birthday, wearing her best dress for a dinner that never existed. I thought of Daniel as a little boy again, sitting at the kitchen table with crayons, making me handmade cards that said, to the best mom ever. Now he didn't even remember the day I was born. My son, the boy who once made me birthday cards with crayon hearts, had forgotten me entirely. I don't know why I still believed that showing up with a cake might make a difference. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was hope, the kind of hope only mothers carry long after everyone else has given up. The night of that party still feels fresh in my mind. The sound of laughter from inside the Magnolia House, the glow of chandeliers spilling through the windows, the faint hum of music. I stood on the porch holding my lemon cake, wrapped carefully in foil, the smell of sugar and butter mixing with the heavy Georgia air. I knocked once. The laughter died instantly, replaced by murmurs and a few awkward glances through the glass. When the door opened, I saw them all. Daniel in a crisp suit, Tiffany in a gold dress that shimmered under the light, and a room full of people I didn't recognize. No one looked happy to see me. I tried to smile. I heard there was a celebration, I said softly. I thought I'd stop by. Tiffany's smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. Martha, she said, her voice sugary sweet. What a surprise. You didn't have to trouble yourself. Daniel stood behind her, not saying a word. His hand rested on her shoulder like a silent agreement. Before I could answer, I heard another voice from the crowd. Martha? It was Helen Grant, Tiffany's mother, my friend of nearly 40 years. We'd met when our children were in middle school. Back then, we traded recipes and stories, attended PTA meetings together, and promised we'd grow old as friends. Now she stood across the room in a sequined jacket, clutching a wine glass, her expression tight and uncomfortable. Our eyes met for a split second. She gave a small, strained smile, half apology, half denial, and then she looked away. That hurt more than I expected. No one invited me in. No one offered me a chair or a drink. The people near the door stared at me like I was a stranger who'd lost her way. I felt heat rising in my face, but I stayed there another moment, pretending I hadn't noticed. I lifted the cake slightly. It's lemon, I said, forcing cheer into my voice. Daniel's favorite. A man near the buffet whispered something I couldn't hear, and a few people laughed quietly. Tiffany took the cake from my hands as though it were something fragile and inconvenient. That's very thoughtful, she said, her tone polite but distant. We'll enjoy it later. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. For a heartbeat, I waited for Daniel to step forward to say, Mom, come in, sit down. But he didn't. He looked everywhere but at me. Helen's eyes flicked to mine again, filled with guilt. She mouthed something, maybe I'm sorry, but I didn't stay long enough to be sure. I stepped back onto the porch, closing the door softly behind me. Through the window I could see the party resuming, the laughter returning as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been there at all. I walked to my car slowly, the sound of my own footsteps echoing against the driveway. My chest ached in that deep, quiet way that doesn't come from anger, but from emptiness. When I sat in the driver's seat, I couldn't start the engine right away. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I felt foolish, like a woman who'd shown up uninvited to a life that had already moved on without her. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that hums louder than any noise. The streets were dark except for the warm glow of porch lights here and there. And then, just as I turned onto my street, I saw him. A small boy sitting on the curb in front of his house, crayons scattered around his feet. His name was Eli, my neighbor's grandson. He saw my car and jumped up, waving both arms. Miss Martha, Wait. I stopped, rolling down the window. Well, hello there, Eli. What are you doing out this late? He grinned, missing one front tooth, and held up a folded piece of the paper. I made you something. Grandma said it was your birthday. I blinked, surprised. You knew? He nodded proudly. She said you like flowers, so I drew some. Look. He handed me the card through the window. It was simple. Stick figure flowers, a big yellow sun, and the words, Happy Birthday. Miss Martha written in uneven letters. Something in my chest cracked open. I took the card carefully, afraid my hands might shake too much and tear it. Thank you, sweetheart, I said softly. It's beautiful. He smiled. You're welcome. I hope you had cake. My throat tightened. I did. I lied. And now I have a beautiful card, too. He waved and ran back toward his porch, humming to himself. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at that crooked little drawing in the glow of my dashboard light. The colors were messy, the handwriting uneven, but it was the kindest thing anyone had done for me that day. When I got home, I placed the card on the kitchen table beside the empty cake pan I'd brought back from the party. I looked around the quiet room, the soft ticking of the old clock filling the air. I whispered to no one in particular. Funny, isn't it? A stranger's grandchild remembered my birthday, but my own son didn't. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at that drawing until the colors blurred. It struck me then, sometimes the people who owe you love forget you completely, while those who owe you nothing remember your heart. Or more simply, a neighbor's child remembered me, but my own son did not. It started with a phone call that I almost didn't answer. I was folding laundry that afternoon when the phone rang, and for a second I thought it might be one of those automated messages asking about car insurance. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up, and I'm glad I did, because that one call changed everything. Mrs. Callahan, said a familiar voice. This is David Cooper from the accounting office. I smiled automatically. Mr. Cooper had handled James's and my finances for decades, ever since Daniel was in college. He was one of those old-fashioned gentlemen who always wore a vest and wrote with a fountain pen, the kind of man who balanced every number twice before signing his name. David, I said. Well, this is a surprise. What can I do for you? There was a short pause on the other end, and I felt my chest tighten before he even spoke. Martha, I hope I'm not worrying you, but I've noticed a few unusual withdrawals from your retirement account. Nothing enormous at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, but it's been happening more and more regularly over the past year. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of them. For a moment, I didn't quite understand what he was saying. I had to sit down at the kitchen table, my hand tightening around the phone. Withdrawals? I repeated. No, David, I haven't taken out a cent from that account. Not since James passed. He cleared his throat softly, his voice careful. That's what I thought you'd say. I also noticed something else. The mailing address on the account seems to have been changed. I just wanted to confirm whether you've moved or authorized anyone to collect your mail on your behalf. I felt the color drain from my face. No, I said after a long pause. I still live right here at the cottage by the river. Same place as always. There was another silence. I could almost hear him frown. Then something's not right, he said quietly. I'll prepare a set of statements for you to review. But, Martha, I'd suggest you visit your post office to make sure your mail hasn't been redirected. It's more common than people think. We said goodbye, and I hung up, but I couldn't move. I sat at that table for a long time, staring at the teapot in front of me as if it might explain something. For months, I hadn't received a single statement from the bank, but I hadn't thought twice about it. Mail went missing sometimes. Storms delayed things. Life carried on. But now, as I looked around the quiet kitchen, I realized I'd ignored all the little signs. I pulled open the drawer where I kept old letters, digging through birthday cards, coupons, and Christmas notes from old students until I found the last envelope from the bank. It was dated almost a year ago, nothing since then. The thought that someone might be stealing my mail made my skin prickle, and the fact that it might be someone I knew, that it might be her, made me feel suddenly sick. The next morning, I waited by the mailbox until Tom, my mail carrier, came by. Tom had been on this route for years, a kind man with gray hair and a sunburned nose who always had a biscuit for the neighborhood dogs. He grinned when he saw me. Morning, Mrs. Callahan. Out enjoying the sunshine? Trying to, I said with a smile, though my heart was pounding. Tom, I wanted to ask you something a little unusual. Shoot, he said, resting his hand on the mailbag. Do you happen to remember if anyone else has been picking up my mail? Maybe someone said I asked them to? He frowned, thinking for a moment, then snapped his fingers. Well, yes, actually. About a month ago, maybe longer, your daughter-in-law stopped me by the gate. Pretty blonde lady, nice car. She said you weren't feeling well and asked her to grab your mail for you. I remember because she waved me off before I could even double-check. I felt my mouth go dry. Tiffany? That's her, he said. I thought she was helping you out. I nodded slowly, forcing a polite smile. Thank you, Tom. You've been a big help. He tipped his hat and went on his way, but I stood there on the curb long after his truck disappeared down the street, the sound of the engine fading into the hum of cicadas. Tiffany had taken my mail. She'd lied to Tom to do it. I went inside, sat down again, and tried to breathe. It didn't make sense. Why would she want my mail? What could she possibly gain from it? But deep down, in that quiet place inside me that always knew when something was wrong, I already had the answer. Later that week, I drove over to the Magnolia House. I told myself it was just to check on things, to see how the renovations were coming along, but really, I needed to look her in the eye. When I arrived, I barely recognized the place. There were trucks in the driveway, men carrying buckets of paint and rolls of plastic sheeting, the smell of sawdust thick in the air. The front porch was littered with tools, and one of the old shutters lay broken on the steps. Inside, it was even worse. The floral wallpaper that James and I had chosen together decades ago was gone. The oak shelves he'd built by hand were half sanded down, and the antique sideboard he made as a wedding gift for me gone. Tiffany stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, looking perfectly in control. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "Martha, didn't expect you today." "I can see that," I said quietly. "What's going on here?" She smiled the way people do when they think you're being unreasonable. "We're just doing some updates. The place was looking a little tired. Don't worry, Daniel approved everything." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to find the right words. "You're tearing apart history," I said finally. "My husband worked on these walls with his own hands. This house is part of our family." She shrugged lightly, turning back to her clipboard. "Well, times change. Some of this stuff is falling apart anyway. You should be thanking me for bringing it back to life." Before I could reply, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Hey there, Martha. Didn't know you were stopping by." It was Joe Harris, my neighbor from across the street. He'd lived there for 20 years, mowing his lawn like clockwork every Sunday morning. I turned to him, grateful for a friendly face. "Hello, Joe. I didn't know you were here." He looked at the workers and shrugged. "Just keeping an eye on things for Daniel. They're making a lot of changes, huh?" "Too many," I said softly. He hesitated. "You know, now that I think about it, a while back, your daughter-in-law came over with some papers. She said you needed to sign them, insurance documents or something. You were on the phone, looked busy, but she said you'd already talked about it, so you just signed and handed them back." My breath caught in my throat. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said. "Didn't think much of it then, but maybe I should have." I thanked him, but my head was spinning. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. I made myself a cup of tea, but it went cold before I even touched it. I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open, trying to write like I always did when something weighed heavy on my heart. The words came out slow, uneven, like they didn't want to be written. Tiffany took my mail. I think she's been changing things without me knowing. Joe said I signed something, but I don't remember. Daniel says nothing. I stared at those sentences until the ink blurred. Then I closed the book and whispered to the empty kitchen. They think I'm old. They think I won't notice. They think I'm too tired to fight. I looked up at the picture of James on the mantel, his kind eyes watching me like always. I used to talk to that photo sometimes when the house felt too quiet, and that night was no different. "What would you do, James?" I asked softly. Because I think I'm finally seeing the truth, and I don't know if I'm strong enough for it. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house felt like a warning, every shadow a reminder of what I might have lost. By morning, I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. And somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, a quiet voice whispered that this wasn't just about love anymore. It was about survival. It wasn't just my son's love they were stealing from me anymore. It was my home, my future, and every piece of security I had left. It took me 3 days to gather the courage to go back to the Magnolia house after what Joe told me. I don't know what I expected to find, maybe some explanation, some sign that I had misunderstood everything, but deep down, I already knew I hadn't. When I pulled up to the house, I could hear the noise before I even stepped out of the car. Hammers, drills, voices shouting orders. It didn't sound like home anymore. It sounded like a construction site. The front porch was covered in sawdust. Paint cans were stacked by the door. A worker carried out one of the old dining chairs that James had built, and I recognized it instantly. The carved backrest, the small scratch Daniel made when he was 8. I ran my hand over it as the man passed. "Where are you taking this?" I asked. He barely looked at me. "Ma'am, you'll have to ask the lady of the house." The lady of the house. Those words stung more than I can say. Inside, the smell of paint and dust hit me like a wall. The wallpaper was gone. The shelves were stripped bare. Even the chandelier, the one James installed himself the summer before he died, had been taken down. I stood in the doorway, my chest tightening, trying to take it all in. Then I heard her. Tiffany. She was in the living room, standing there with her arms folded, instructing a group of workers like she was the queen of some little empire. Her hair was tied up and she wore a crisp white blouse that somehow never seemed to get dirty, no matter how much chaos surrounded her. When she saw me, she smiled, but it wasn't a smile of welcome. It was the kind that says, "You shouldn't be here." "Martha," she said, tilting her head slightly, her tone polite but cool, "you didn't tell us you were coming by today." "I don't have to tell you when I visit my own house," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. She laughed softly. "Your house?" "Oh, Martha, I think it's time we cleared something up. You said Daniel and I could live here as our home. That means we make the decisions about what happens inside it." I looked around at what they had done. The built-in cabinet where James used to keep his record player was gone. The window seat Daniel loved to curl up on as a boy had been ripped out, and the bay window that used to let in golden afternoon light was covered in plastic sheeting. "What decisions?" I asked quietly. "You've torn apart 40 years of memories. You've erased everything that made this house what it was." Tiffany sighed as if she were tired of explaining herself to a stubborn child. "It's called renovation, Martha. You can't cling to the past forever. This house was falling apart. We're just giving it new life." "New life?" I said, my voice shaking. "You're not giving it new life. You're erasing mine?" Her smile faltered for a moment, then hardened again. "You know what your problem is? You don't know how to let go. You still act like you get to control everything. Daniel, the house, the finances. It's exhausting. We're adults. We need freedom." Her voice rose until the workers began to glance in our direction, pretending not to listen, but clearly catching every word. "Freedom?" I repeated. "From what?" "From kindness? From the woman who raised the man you married?" "Martha," she snapped, her eyes narrowing, "we need space. We need privacy. We can't keep living under your shadow. You may have built this house with your husband, but it's ours now. You gave it to us, remember?" I felt something inside me snap. I had given them the keys, yes, but I hadn't given away my history, my memories, or my dignity. Before I could answer, Daniel came down the hallway, looking flustered, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. I turned to him, relief and anger mixing inside me. "You tell me," I said. "Your wife is tearing down this house like it's nothing. She's throwing away everything your father built, and you're standing there doing nothing." Daniel froze. Please don't make a scene. Tiffany's right. The house needed some work. We just want to make it our own." "Our own?" I whispered. "Daniel, your father built this with his hands. I scrubbed these floors when you were a baby. Every inch of this place holds our family in it. And now it looks like a stranger lives here." He rubbed the back of his neck, not meeting my eyes. "You're overreacting," he said quietly. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Tiffany stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "See? This is what I was talking about," she said to him, as if I wasn't even standing there. "She can't let us breathe." That was when I realized something that I hadn't let myself believe until that moment. She didn't just dislike me. She wanted me gone. Entirely. Out of Daniel's life, out of the house, out of their future. I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something. Anything, to stop her. But he just looked at the floor. His silence said everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with dust and tension, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the sound of the hammering in the next room. Then I took a slow breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady. "You may think you can erase me," I said softly. "You can tear down the wallpaper, paint over the past, and throw away the furniture, but you can't rewrite where this house came from or who it belongs to." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "We'll see about that," she muttered. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked toward the front door, each step heavy but certain. The workers stepped aside as I passed, and no one dared to speak. Outside, the afternoon sun was hot, and the scent of freshly cut wood filled the air. I stood there for a moment, looking up at the house. My house. And I could almost see James on the porch, hammer in hand, smiling that patient smile of his. "I won't let them erase me," I whispered. "I won't let them turn me into something old and disposable." For the first time in a long while, I didn't just feel sad. I felt something stronger. Resolve. They thought I was fragile, that I would crumble quietly and disappear. But they had no idea. I was just beginning to remember who I really was. When I left the Magnolia House that day, I didn't drive straight home. I parked by the river instead, the same spot where James and I used to sit on Sunday afternoons. The water moved slow and calm, like it had all the time in the world, but inside me everything was spinning. I could still hear Tiffany's voice echoing in my head, sharp, dismissive, certain. For most of my life, I've been the kind of woman who believed that kindness could solve almost anything. When students misbehaved, I gave them second chances. When Daniel made mistakes growing up, I told him, "It's all right, son, as long as you learn from it." But this was different. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad decision. This was deceit, carefully planned and carried out by people who knew me well enough to know where I was weakest. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again with my journal open, staring at a blank page until finally I wrote 3 words. I need help. The next morning, I called Edna Phillips. Edna and I had taught at the same high school years ago. I taught literature, she taught civics before she left to go to law school. She'd always been sharp, the kind of woman who could look through your excuses and see the truth hiding underneath. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when she answered, her voice sounded exactly the same. "Martha Callahan," she said. "Well, that's a voice I haven't heard in too long." I tried to smile even though my hands were trembling. "Edna, I need to ask for a favor, a big one." "Then come over," she said without hesitation, "and bring your tea preference. I still don't know how you drink that weak stuff." When I arrived at her house, she already had papers spread out on the dining table, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. I hadn't even explained everything yet, and she was ready. That's how Edna was, always 2 steps ahead. I told her everything about the missing mail, the strange withdrawals, Joe's story about Tiffany bringing documents for me to sign. I showed her the few bank statements Mr. Cooper had sent me and my notes from our phone call. She listened carefully, not interrupting once, only asking questions when she needed to. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. "Martha, this isn't just disrespectful," she said finally. "This is fraud, plain and simple." The word hung in the air. Fraud. "I was afraid you'd say that," I whispered. "We're not jumping to conclusions," she said, her tone softer now, "but we are going to get some answers." She picked up her phone and called Mr. Cooper right then. Within an hour, he'd agreed to meet us at her house with the full financial records. When he arrived, he looked troubled. That kind of quiet worry you see in people who've uncovered more than they wanted to. "I've been reviewing everything," he said, spreading the papers out, across the table. "There are multiple withdrawals over the last 18 months, some small, some larger, but altogether they add up to just over $70,000. I stared at the numbers, the neat little columns of figures that suddenly felt like a personal betrayal written in ink. 70,000, I repeated, the words barely leaving my lips. Edna pointed to one of the forms. "And these signatures, you can see the difference. Look at the slant, the spacing. That's not your handwriting, Martha." She was right. My name was there, but it wasn't mine. It looked like someone had tried to copy it, practiced even. Tiffany must have watched me sign my name enough times to mimic it. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. "She really thought I'd never notice," I said. "She thought because I'm old, because I move slower now, I just let it all slip away." Mr. Cooper adjusted his glasses. "People who do things like this always assume they're smarter than everyone else," he said quietly, "but they leave traces, every time." Edna nodded. And we'll find them. The three of us worked for hours that afternoon, spreading papers across the dining table until it looked like a small war room. Edna asked sharp questions. Mr. Cooper highlighted transactions. I flipped through old checkbooks, trying to match every payment I could remember. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. When the evidence began to take shape, Edna leaned forward, tapping her pen on the table. Here's what we do next, she said. We make copies of everything. We contact the bank's fraud department directly, and we get a notary to verify your actual signature for comparison. Then, when the time comes, we'll have every piece of proof lined up. I nodded, my voice small but steady. And Daniel? She hesitated. We'll deal with him when we have to. Right now, focus on protecting yourself. Just as we were packing up the documents, the doorbell rang. Edna went to answer, and there stood Joe Harris, holding his cap in both hands. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. Martha, I've been thinking about what I told you the other day. If you need me to back that up, about Tiffany and those papers, I'll do it. I saw it with my own eyes. For a moment I couldn't speak. Joe, I said finally, you'd really do that? He nodded. You've been a good neighbor to me for years. It's about time someone stands up for you. Something warm spread through my chest then. Not relief exactly, but gratitude mixed with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in months. Edna smiled at him. Good man, she said. We'll be in touch. When he left, I turned to her, my throat tight. You know, I said quietly, for the first time in a long time, I don't feel alone. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're not, she said simply. I looked down at the pile of papers, the evidence of betrayal, the proof of theft. But for once, it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of a fight I was finally ready to take on. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I finally had people on my side, my own little team, ready to help me take my life back. Once Edna and Mr. Cooper had laid everything out, the papers, the numbers, the forgeries, I realized that what scared me most wasn't the theft itself. It was how easily it had happened right under my nose, and how blind love had made me. For the first few days after our little investigation, I barely slept. I would wake up in the middle of the night, the glow of the street lamp leaking through my curtains, and lie there listening to the ticking of the old clock on my dresser. That sound had always comforted me before. It reminded me of James working late, writing in his study. But now, it felt like the clock was counting down toward something, a confrontation I couldn't avoid forever. Edna, though, had a plan. She always did. We stay quiet, she told me one morning over tea. Let them think you're still in the dark. Meanwhile, we gather everything we need. Every document, every date, every statement. When the time comes, we'll drop it all at once. No warning. There was a calm certainty in her voice that steadied me. It reminded me of the way I used to speak to my students before a big exam. Confident even when I was nervous myself. And Martha, she added a woo, I want you to go to the post office and open a P.O. box. Don't tell Daniel. Don't tell anyone. That way, all your financial mail goes directly to you, no middlemen. It was such a simple thing, opening that little metal box at the post office, but for some reason it felt monumental. Standing in line, I looked around at the people waiting. An elderly man paying his bills, a young mother juggling her toddler and a stack of envelopes, and I realized how small and ordinary acts of taking control could be. When they handed me the key to box 214, I held it tightly in my palm. It wasn't just a key to a mailbox, it was a symbol of privacy, of protection, of taking something back that had been quietly slipping away. From that day on, I started to feel a little stronger. I didn't tell Daniel or Tiffany what I knew. When Tiffany called occasionally, her voice sugary sweet, checking on me in that careful fake way she had, I kept my tone light. Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just busy with church activities. And I was. I started going back to Sunday service every week. I'd always been a quiet believer, the kind who found God more in nature than in sermons. But there was something about sitting in that wooden pew again, surrounded by familiar faces, that made me feel anchored. The choir's voices rose around me, and I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about betrayal or paperwork. I was just breathing. Edna encouraged me to keep my mind busy, too. Don't let them steal your peace, Martha, she said. They've taken enough already. So when the community center announced a watercolor painting class, I signed up. It felt silly at first. I hadn't Painted since college, and my hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but the instructor, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair, told us on the first day, watercolor has a mind of its own. The trick isn't to control it, but to guide it. That line stuck with me. Maybe that's what life was like at this age. You couldn't control everything, no matter how hard you tried. Children grew up and changed, love faded, plans unraveled, but you could guide it. You could choose what colors to keep and which ones to let bleed away. Each week I found myself looking forward to class. I started with small things, blue skies, yellow flowers, then moved on to landscapes. One afternoon I painted the magnolia house from memory, the way it used to look before Tiffany stripped it bare, the ivy climbing the porch, the lace curtains billowing in the breeze. My lines weren't perfect and the colors bled into each other, but somehow it felt right. Like I was reclaiming the house in my own quiet way. At home, I'd pin my paintings above the kitchen counter where the morning light hit them. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling at them as I made coffee, like they were old friends come back to visit. Meanwhile, Edna and Mr. Cooper kept working behind the scenes. They documented every withdrawal, every signature. They found out which credit cards had been opened in my name. Edna even contacted a notary to certify samples of my handwriting. When the time comes, she said, they won't have a leg to stand on. Knowing that someone was out there fighting for me, not out of pity, but because it was the right thing to do, gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as the sun was setting, I sat on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sky turn gold and pink. The crickets were beginning to sing, and for once the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt alive. I thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation, the anger, the fear, and I realized something surprising. I wasn't just surviving it anymore. I was changing because of it. There was still a long road ahead. I knew that. There would be more arguments, more heartbreak, maybe even a legal fight. But sitting there that evening, with the soft wind rustling through the trees and the scent of jasmine in the air, I felt a kind of calm determination that I hadn't known I still possessed. James used to say that people are like old trees. Storms may strip their branches, but as long as their roots hold firm, they'll find a way to bloom again. And that night, as I blew out the candle beside me, I whispered to the darkness, I think I'm starting to bloom again, James. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, like I was rising from the ashes of everything that had tried to break me. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage to call Helen. We had been friends for more than 40 years, through school fundraisers, funerals, weddings, Sunday picnics, and all the little ordinary things that knit two women's lives together over time. She was there when James died. She was there when Daniel graduated, when I broke my hip that winter, when I thought loneliness would swallow me whole. So it only felt right that I should go to her now, before everything fell apart completely. When she picked up the phone, her voice sounded just the same as always, warm, polite, with that soft southern drawl that made even hard truths sound gentle. Martha, she said, goodness, it's been too long. How are you, dear? I hesitated. Not too well, I'm afraid. Could we talk? In person? Of course, she said without hesitation. Come by this afternoon. I'll make coffee. That gave me a little hope. The kind of small, flickering hope that keeps you moving even when you know the road ahead won't be kind. When I arrived, Helen's house looked exactly the same as it always had. The same flower pots lined her porch, the same lace curtains hung in the windows. For a moment, I let myself imagine it was 20 years ago, before Tiffany, before the silence with Daniel, before all of this. Helen greeted me with a hug, but it was brief, almost stiff, like she wasn't sure how close to let me be. I'm so glad you came, she said, leading me inside. I've been meaning to call you, truly, but things have been a little tense lately. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of coffee drifting between us. She poured me a cup, added cream the way she knew I liked, and for a few minutes we just talked about nothing. The weather, the church bake sale, the azaleas blooming early that year. But I could feel it. The tension sitting between us like a shadow neither of us wanted to name. Finally, I took a breath and said, Helen, I know you're close with Tiffany, and I don't want to make you choose sides, but there are things happening that you should know. Her smile faltered, and I saw the lines around her mouth tighten. Martha, I've heard some things too, she said softly. Tiffany's been very upset. She says you've been confused lately, forgetting things, making accusations that don't make sense. The words hit me like a cold wind. I set my cup down carefully before I spoke, afraid my hands might shake. Confused? I repeated. Helen, I've never been more clear in my life. She's been taking money out of my accounts, changing documents, and lying to Daniel. I have proof. Edna and my accountant found forged signatures, missing funds. It's all there. Helen's brow furrowed, but she didn't look at me. She looked at her coffee, stirring it, though it didn't need stirring. Tiffany says you've been under a lot of stress, she said quietly, and you've had health issues in the past. Maybe you misremembered signing something? These things happen with age, you know. I felt my heart drop. Helen, I said slowly, you've known me for 40 years. Do I sound like I've lost my mind to you? She looked up then, her eyes soft and troubled. No, she said after a moment, you don't. But she's my daughter, Martha. What would you have me do? Call her a liar? I leaned forward, my voice trembling now, not from anger, but from the ache of being doubted. I would have you believe me, I said. Just believe that I wouldn't make this up. You've seen me handle my life for years. I've managed my home, my finances, my health. Do you really think I'd suddenly forget how to read my own name? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to think, she whispered. Tiffany tells me one story, you tell me another. And Daniel? Well, he says he's caught in the middle. I feel like I'm being torn in two. The sound of her voice cracked something inside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. When she finally did speak again, her words were soft but heavy. Martha, please don't take this the wrong way, but maybe you should see a doctor, just to be sure. If it turns out you're right about everything, I'll apologize for ever doubting you. I swallowed hard. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't break what was already hanging by a thread. I see, I said quietly. You think I'm imagining it? No, she said quickly, reaching across the table, her hand hovering above mine but not quite touching. I think you're hurting. And I think we both love our families, maybe too much. I nodded slowly, though the words barely made it past the lump in my throat. We sat there for a while longer, talking about safe things, recipes, the church, old memories, both of us pretending that the air between us wasn't full of doubt. When I finally stood to leave, she hugged me again, but it felt different this time. There was hesitation in it. As I walked down her porch steps, I turned back and said softly, Helen, I hope one day you'll understand. I'm not the one who's lost. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't answer. The drive home felt longer than usual. The streets I'd driven for decades looked strange, as if they belonged to someone else. When I got home, I sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside, watching the sunlight fade over the river. Losing Daniel had been one kind of pain, sharp and immediate like a wound you can't stop touching. But losing Helen felt different. It was quieter, deeper, like watching a bridge crumble between two shores that had always seemed unshakable. That night, I wrote in my journal, I've lost my son to silence and my friend to doubt. Maybe that's the cruelest thing about getting older. Not that your body weakens, but that the people you trusted most start to see you as fragile. I closed the book and whispered to the empty room, I've already lost my son. I can't bear to lose my oldest friend, too. But deep down, I knew the truth. I already had. In one lifetime, I had now lost two things I thought were unbreakable: a child's love and a friend's trust. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, sometimes in anger, sometimes in fear, but mostly in quiet resolve. There's something strange about waiting for a confrontation you know must come. It's like standing in the eye of a storm, knowing that the wind will return at any moment, but you can't run anymore. You've already spent too long being afraid. That afternoon, the Magnolia house felt colder than I remembered. The renovation mess had been cleared and the furniture was arranged neatly again, but the air carried a kind of tension that no amount of cleaning could wash away. In the living room sat the four of them, Daniel, Tiffany, Helen, and me. Daniel looked nervous, his hands clasped between his knees. Tiffany sat beside him, calm and poised, like someone who believed she still held all the cards. Helen was quiet, avoiding my eyes, though I could see from her tight jaw that she was already questioning things. I placed a thick folder on the coffee table. The sound it made, that dull thud of paper against wood, seemed to echo in the silence. This won't take long, I said softly. I just want to talk, and I want you all to listen. Tiffany leaned back with a faint smile. Of course, she said. We're all concerned about you, Martha. I think it's good that we finally discuss your confusion. That word, Confusion although got landed like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I had prepared for this. Edna had helped me gather every document, every bank statement, every notarized form. This wasn't just a mother's heartbreak anymore. This was evidence. Let's start with this, I said, opening the folder. These are copies of the withdrawals from my retirement account. Mr. Cooper traced them. $70,000 taken over the last 18 months. I didn't withdraw them, and I certainly didn't authorize anyone else to. Daniel shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. Mom, maybe you forgot. I raised a hand. Don't, Daniel, please. Just look. He fell silent. These next pages, I continued, laying them out one by one, show my signature, or rather what someone tried to make look like my signature, on several documents. I had them verified by a handwriting specialist. They're forgeries. Tiffany laughed quietly, shaking her head. This is absurd. Martha, you're letting that so-called lawyer friend of yours fill your head with nonsense. You're clearly— Don't finish that sentence, I said, my voice firmer now. You've already told people I'm senile, confused, losing touch. I've seen the posts you made online, the way you've painted me as a poor old woman being taken advantage of. But the thing about lies, Tiffany, is that they only work when no one's watching. Her smile faltered just for a second. Helen shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. Tiffany, you said those withdrawals were for house repairs, she said softly. Is that true? Of course it is, Tiffany replied quickly, recovering her composure. Everything we did was for the house, for its value, for the family. Martha just doesn't understand modern renovations. I could almost admire how smoothly she lied. Almost. Then explain this, I said, sliding another page forward. A transfer to a luxury furniture company in Atlanta, one that sells designer pieces, and another to a jewelry store, all under my name. Daniel blinked. Wait, jewelry? Tiffany opened her mouth, but I cut her off. Don't bother. We both know what that money bought. Your new ring, the one you told everyone was a gift from your husband, it was. You just didn't mention who paid for it. The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Tiffany straightened her shoulders. This is ridiculous. You're twisting things. You're not well, Martha. I've been patient, but this paranoia of yours. Enough. The word came out louder than I meant it to, but I didn't apologize. My voice had trembled for too long. Now it was steady, sharp, alive. Do you know what it feels like, I said, leaning forward, to raise a child, to sacrifice every comfort, to pour your life into a home, and then sit quietly while someone waltzes in and treats it all like it's disposable? You've taken my kindness for weakness, Tiffany. You've mistaken love for stupidity, but you're about to learn the difference. She crossed her arms, chin lifted. And who's going to believe you? That was when I heard the knock on the door. 3 sharp taps, right on time. I turned to Daniel. Would you get that, please? He hesitated, then stood and opened the door. In stepped Mr. Joe Harris, my neighbor, hat in hand but eyes clear and steady. Afternoon, folks, he said. Sorry to intrude, but I think I can help clear a few things up. Tiffany's expression froze. What is this? I gestured toward him. Go ahead, Joe. He nodded politely. Mrs. Callahan asked me to come because I was there the day this all started. I saw your wife, Daniel, bring papers for your mama to sign. She said they were insurance documents, but Martha was on the phone. She barely glanced at them. Tiffany told her she'd explained everything already. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to interfere. Now I wish I had. Helen's eyes widened. You actually saw that? Joe nodded solemnly. Plain as day. Tiffany's face went pale, but she quickly tried to recover. You're mistaken, she snapped. I would never— But Helen interrupted her, her voice trembling. Tiffany, I remember that week. You told me you were taking paperwork over to Martha's. You said it was just to update her insurance. But when I asked later how it went, you brushed me off. You said she didn't even look at them. Her hand went to her mouth as realization dawned. My God, you lied. Tiffany turned on her. Mom, stop. You don't understand. No, Helen said, standing now, her voice shaking but firm. I understand perfectly. You've been lying for months. Maybe longer. You let me defend you. You let me believe my best friend was losing her mind. The room went deathly quiet. Daniel looked between them, his face pale. "Tiffany, is any of this true?" She didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a hard line, and for the first time she looked cornered. "Daniel," I said softly, "you wanted proof? There it is." He sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "Oh, God," he murmured. Tiffany's mask finally cracked. "You think she's innocent?" she snapped. "She's manipulative. She's trying to ruin us." I stood then, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "The only thing I've ever tried to do, Tiffany, is protect my family. And maybe that was my mistake, thinking that protecting you meant staying silent. But that ends now." For a moment no one moved. The air in the room felt heavy, almost electric. Then Helen stepped toward me, her eyes wet with tears. "Martha," she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to believe it. I should have trusted you." I squeezed her hand gently. "You believed your daughter. Any mother would have." Daniel finally looked up, his voice breaking. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I thought she was helping." "I know you did," I said quietly. "But love doesn't mean closing your eyes, son. Sometimes it means opening them to the truth, even when it hurts." Tiffany stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "You think anyone will side with you? You're just—" "Enough," Daniel said, cutting her off. His tone was soft, but there was steel in it now. "Just stop, Tiffany." She stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face, but he didn't look away this time. Silence settled again, deep and final. I looked around the room, at my son, broken and ashamed, at Helen, tears streaking her cheeks, at Joe, standing tall and unflinching, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. I gathered the papers and slipped them back into the folder, my fingers brushing the rough edges. The truth was out now. There was no taking it back. As I stood to leave, I looked at them one last time and said softly, "For months, you made me doubt myself. You made me feel small, invisible, powerless. But today, I take that power back." Then I turned and walked out into the afternoon light, the sound of the door closing behind me like the final page of a long, painful chapter. The truth was finally out, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one being judged. I was the one taking back my power. 2 weeks after that day in the living room, the house went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Not the suffocating silence of shame or confusion, but the stillness that comes after a storm has passed, when the air feels heavy yet strangely clear. I had made my decision. The papers were spread neatly on the table in front of me, every line reviewed twice by Edna and Mr. Cooper. The Magnolia House, the home James and I had built, loved, and lost to pride and manipulation, was finally going to be sold. When I told Daniel and Tiffany to meet me that afternoon, I didn't give them a reason. I wanted them to hear it directly from me, in the very room where everything had once begun. They arrived together, though they didn't look united anymore. Tiffany was pale but furious, her movements sharp and restless. Daniel trailed behind, quiet, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Helen came too at my request. She had insisted on being there, not out of pity, but because she said, "If the truth can hurt in front of me, then justice can heal in front of me too." We gathered again in that living room. The same sunlight slanted through the windows, catching the dust in the air. The same clock ticked softly in the corner, as if time itself was holding its breath. I folded my hands, feeling calm, almost peaceful. "I asked you all here," I began, "because it's time this house finds peace again. I'm selling the Magnolia House." Tiffany froze, her mouth falling open. "What did you just say?" "I'm selling it," I repeated. "The sale is already in motion. The buyers are a retired couple from Chicago. They love old homes. They'll take care of it the way it deserves." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tiffany's composure shattered. "You can't do that," she screamed. "You can't just take it away from us after everything we've done to make it livable." I looked at her steadily. "Livable? You tore its heart out, Tiffany. You painted over history and called it progress. You spent my savings to feed your vanity. I won't let you destroy what's left." She clenched her fists, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I'll sue you. I'll drag you into court for everything. You'll regret this." Helen stood then, her voice firm but calm. "You won't, Tiffany. You've done enough damage. You forged documents, you took money that wasn't yours. You should be grateful Martha isn't pressing charges. Tiffany turned to her mother, her voice breaking. You're taking her side? Your own daughter? Helen's expression softened, but she didn't waver. I'm taking the side of truth, she said quietly. Something you stopped doing a long time ago. Tiffany's face twisted with disbelief, then rage. You all think I'm the villain, she hissed. Fine. Enjoy your little show. She stormed out, the sound of her heels echoing down the hall, until the front door slammed. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but it wasn't unbearable. It felt necessary, like an ending that had finally earned its stillness. Daniel remained seated, staring at the floor. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Mom, he said after a long pause, his voice raw. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what she was doing. I looked at him, my son, grown but still that frightened boy deep inside. I believe that, I said softly. But, Daniel, not knowing is one thing. Choosing not to see is another. He flinched but didn't argue. You're right, he whispered. I chose not to see. We sat like that for a moment, two people bound by love and mistakes trying to find our way back through the wreckage. Then the notary cleared his throat gently from across the room. Mrs. Callahan, he said, if you're ready, we can sign. I nodded. My hand trembled only slightly as I picked up the pen. The sound of it scratching against a paper felt like something sacred, a quiet declaration of ownership, of freedom, of closure. When I set the pen down, I looked around the room one last time. The Magnolia House had been through so much. Laughter, love, betrayal, heartbreak. But as the sunlight touched the old wooden floorboards, it still looked beautiful to me. Helen smiled softly. You did it, Martha. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. After all these years of being pushed aside, of being told I didn't belong, I've taken back what was mine. Daniel looked up, his eyes wet. What will you do now? I smiled faintly. Live, I said simply. In peace this time. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of the storm. After the sale went through, the Magnolia House no longer belonged to me, at least not on paper. But in my heart it always would. The first few weeks after signing those papers were quieter than I expected. Tiffany disappeared completely, leaving only traces of chaos behind, unpaid bills, broken furniture, and silence. No calls, no messages, just absence. Helen tried to reach her at first, but Tiffany refused to answer. Eventually, Helen stopped trying. One afternoon, she came to see me, holding a pie she'd baked herself. Lemon, my favorite. I don't know what to say that will fix it, she said softly as she set it on my kitchen table. But I do know that I should have believed you sooner. I looked at her, my friend of 40 years, and saw how guilt had etched new lines into her face. I reached across the table and took her hand. You believed your daughter, I said gently. That's what mothers do. You would have done the same for me once, and I can't hold that against you. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said with a small smile, but you have it anyway. We didn't talk about Tiffany again after that. Some wounds heal faster when you stop reopening them. Daniel filed for divorce soon after. I didn't ask for details, I didn't need them. He sent a short message saying he'd moved into a small apartment downtown. Every few weeks I'd see his name light up on my phone, but most times the call ended before I could answer. I knew he wanted to reach out, but guilt can be a wall thicker than any distance. I let him take his time. Healing, I'd learned, can't be forced, not in others and not in yourself. So I focused on what I could control, rebuilding my own life. With Edna's encouragement, I started volunteering at our local church, helping organize workshops for older adults about financial safety. At first, it was just me and a handful of retirees sitting in a circle in the fellowship hall, sharing stories about phone scams and tricky relatives. But soon, the meetings grew. Word spread, and people began calling it Secure Seniors. Though I never meant to start an organization. It just became one. Helping others reminded me of who I used to be. The teacher who could make a complicated story simple, the woman who knew how to guide others without telling them what to do. The more I gave, the lighter I felt. 3 years passed. 3 full turns of the seasons, each softer than the one before. On a warm spring afternoon, we held a fundraiser for Secure Seniors in the church garden. There were folding tables lined with baked goods, pastel banners swaying in the wind, and the scent of jasmine in the air. I stood at the small podium we'd borrowed from the pastor's office, looking out at the crowd. 100 faces, maybe more. Some were people I'd helped, others were families of those who'd been through the same kind of betrayal I once thought only belonged to me. When I began to speak, I didn't use notes, I just spoke from the heart. I used to think getting old meant losing everything, I said. Your strength, your home, your place in the world. But it isn't about losing. It's about changing. And sometimes the pieces that break are the very ones that let the light in. The crowd was silent, listening. Then, warm applause filled the garden. After the speeches, people came up to thank me. Kind faces, strong handshakes. I felt surrounded by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. And then, near the back of the crowd, I saw him. Daniel. He looked older, thinner, grayer, but his eyes were the same. He held something in his hands, a small leather notebook worn at the edges. When the last few guests drifted away, he walked up to me slowly. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer right away. He held out the notebook. "I found this when I was cleaning out some of Tiffany's things. It's Dad's old journal, the one he used to keep on his desk." I took it, my hands trembling slightly. The leather was warm from his touch. I ran my fingers over James's familiar handwriting on the cover, JC etched in neat letters. "He wrote about you," Daniel said quietly. "About how proud he was. About how he hoped I'd learn to love with the same courage you have." My throat tightened. He hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom, for not standing up for you, for choosing silence." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd failed me, but the boy who once promised to protect me and got lost along the way. "I can't forget it," I said softly, "and I'm not sure I can forgive it yet. But—" I reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, hesitant at first, then firm. "But we can start from here." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I'd like that." We stood there for a moment, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the scent of spring lilacs around us. The band from the church began playing softly in the background, a hymn I hadn't heard in years. And as I looked around, at the tables filled with laughter, the old friends, the new faces, my son beside me, I felt something inside settle, quietly and completely. I had lost a house once, yes, but I had found something far greater, peace, purpose, and a new kind of family, made not by blood but by choice. I may have lost a house, but I found myself, and a new family who reminded me that love, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before.